1, 2, 3, 4.
Such a good song, I hate to cut that off, but welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth Radio here on Blog Talk Radio. And my special thanks once again to Vocal Brush for providing that fantastic music as intro for the show. That was Desperate Moments by Vocal Brush, used by permission here on my show exclusively at this time. But if you're interested in her music, please check her out at YouTube. And her channel on YouTube is Vocal Brush, all as one word, VOCALBRUSH. And please support her work. She's an excellent musician, and she's very creative in other ways as well. So check out her channel on YouTube and send her a thank you or send her a comment. Tell her if you appreciate her music, because I do, and I certainly would like to spread the word about her. Also, I just want to remind everybody that you can check me out on YouTube as well. My channel is Tenebrous T, T-E-N-E-B-R-O-U-S-T, and I also have a show there called The Stench of Truth as well. And I talk mostly about economics and politics over there. But every once in a while I touch on some of the issues that we discuss here on this show. So I don't want to spend too much time going over all of that stuff, because I know that we have such a huge issue to talk about today with our very, very special guest, Dave McGowan. And Dave McGowan is probably best known for the Laurel Canyon series that he's done. You can check him out on the web at davesweb.cnchost.com. That's davesweb.cnchost.com. And he has two long series that he has been working on. One is Inside Laurel Canyon, or Inside the LC as it's known, and Wagging the Moon Doggie. And we're gonna be focused mainly on the Laurel Canyon stuff today. But if we do get a chance, we'll go on to some of the stuff on Apollo as well, which is also a very fascinating topic. Dave has also written several books, 3 of them in fact. And you can find them on his website. One is Programmed to Kill, The Politics of Serial Murder. And the second one is Understanding the F Word, American Fascism and the Politics of Illusion. And the third one is Derailing Democracy, the America the Media Don't Want You to See. And that sounds like that could describe very keenly what's going on in our country today. So Inside the LC with Dave McGowan, and I'm going to bring him on the line right now without any further ado, and we'll get right into our discussion. Hello, Dave. Are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you doing?
Oh, very good, very good. I'm so happy that you agreed to do the interview with me, and we were talking prior to coming on the show. You were saying how the Laurel Canyon series has generated a great deal of interest just recently. And I think, as I was telling you, it's probably because it's such a fantastic work in progress, and it's obvious by your writing and the amount of material that you've gathered together that it's a monumental piece of work, and I think a lot of people are very interested in the topic and the types of connections that you make, because from what I see in society and from what I see doing my videos and doing my radio show, there's a lot more interest being placed in the kind of research that you're doing, which is the kind that makes connections that people are not overtly aware of. And I think that's part of the reason why you have such an interest in your work. And I'm just very glad to have you on the show today to talk about it.
I'm very glad to be here, and as you said, there is a considerable amount of interest in this particular story, which kind of has taken me by surprise, because I've been sort of battling in the trenches now for, 12 years or so, I think, since my first book came out, and on the web longer than that, and I've, as you mentioned, I've delved into the Apollo story with the Wagging the Moon Doggie series, and of course an extensive amount of work on 911 and various other things. And the peak oil is another one that I did a lot of work on. But the Laurel Canyon series seems to be the one that's really captured the people's imagination, more so than anything else I've done. And I think that might be due to the fact that it's an area that nobody else has really ever looked into. It was a story that kind of remained almost completely untold for 40 years or something. And whereas other people obviously have tackled Apollo and obviously 911 and all these various other things, but this one is I think is very, very fresh to most people, and so I guess I imagine that's why it's sort of taken off the way it has, I guess. But that's the best guess I have for it anyway. But for whatever reason, it seems to be the one that everybody wants to talk about, and as I mentioned to you before we came on, I've got like half a dozen people right now that are requesting interviews, and yeah, it's really sort of taken on a life of its own.
Well, as I said, I can see why, because it is, and I think you have a very good point there, talking about issues that are not necessarily something that's been worked over, 5 or 6 times by other writers. It's more or less your baby. I mean, it's really entirely your work, and the breadth of the connections that you make certainly makes it a very compelling story. And if I might say as well, I really enjoy your writing style, especially in Wagging the Moon Doggie. The sarcasm that you use in that is just brilliant. It's brilliant. It really is. And it's also a fascinating story, and the way you've put it together. But if I could ask you, how did you get focused in on Laurel Canyon, and what got you interested in starting to do some research in that department?
It actually started very innocently a few years ago when my wife and I were getting ready to go on vacation. I don't remember where. We were going somewhere, some tropical location to lounge on the beach, and I didn't, I just wanted to kind of shut off my brain for a couple of weeks and get away from, all of this kind of stuff. So my eldest daughter had gotten me the book Laurel Canyon by Michael Walker, I believe it is, which came out a few years ago, which is a very, very mainstream telling of the Laurel Canyon story, of how all these musicians, these influential musicians of the 60s came to be gathered there, and how it was kind of the LA counterpart to Haight-Ashbury up in San Francisco, and actually preceded Haight-Ashbury. And I mean, even that angle of the story hadn't really ever been told. I mean, most people associated the beginnings of the sort of hippie and flower child movements and that whole music scene that accompanied it with San Francisco and the Haight-Ashbury, whereas in reality, it had actually started a couple of years before that down here in Laurel Canyon. So, but it was a very, very mainstream, non-controversial, account of that. And I took it away on vacation to read with me, and all sorts of little red flags in this book that just piqued my interest. Like he would make little offhand remarks, like he mentioned. He made a mention of Lookout Mountain Laboratory, but without identifying it by name or function or anything. It was just like sort of just a little like a throwaway, almost like a throwaway sentence, in the book about, and one of the weirder aspects of this was that there was this secret, intelligence compound right in the middle of all this stuff going on. And then he just left it, and just threw it out there as though it was just sort of an aside, of no significance, which, of course, to me, had huge significance. And
Absolutely.
There were a lot of little things like that, just little odds and ends that just got me, that just piqued my interest. And, I had devoured the book by the time we got home, I mean, I was like on the internet immediately, just trying to dig into all of these little red flags that had gone off when reading it, and quickly discovered that there was a much bigger story, even than a far bigger story than what had been told in the book, and just sort of took it from there and ran with it, and so it was just one of those things. It just kind of fell into my lap, and but I'm very happy that it did, and very proud of the work that I've done, and the fact that I sort of uncovered this huge hidden story that everyone else had overlooked for a good 40 years.
Yes, and it was very true, and of course, as you noted, the secret laboratory up there, and the immense amount of military and intelligence connections to some of the bigger names in rock music, and also Hollywood as well, and the connections between all of these people. It's sort of like a 2 or 3 steps away kind of thing at the most, but oftentimes you have very, very close connections. And one of the things that I found most fascinating about the Laurel Canyon issue is how you folded this all together in such a way that it gives a very strong impression that there was some kind of I don't know if you want to call it an active program that's coming out of there, or if it's just people taking advantage of certain situations or whatever as they came up. But it seems like there has been this sort of opposite of the hippie anti-war movement coming out of Laurel Canyon with a lot of these people because of the military and the intelligence connections. Is that kind of the sense that you get out of it?
Yeah, it's astounding how many of these people are, as it turns out, are sons and daughters of the, military intelligence complex. Virtually all of the key figures. I mean, if you take any of the bands that were, the influential bands of the period in Laurel Canyon, such as the Mamas and the Papas, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, the Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, and various others. I'm drawing a blank right now. If you look at it, virtually any of them, the key figures within them, whether it's John Phillips or Frank Zappa or David Crosby or Stephen Stills, virtually all of them, right down the line, have some kind of fairly direct connection, family connection for the most part, to the military intelligence complex. Like Frank Zappa's father worked at the Edgewood Arsenal as a chemical, either was it chemical or biological warfare operative, and John Phillips' father was a career Marine Corps officer, and virtually his entire family worked for either intelligence entities or the Defense Department. His mother worked at his mother worked at the Pentagon, as did his first wife, and just on and on and on down the list. You find that every one of these people can be directly connected to, has a direct family connection to the military intelligence complex. And in addition to all of the musicians that were populating the canyon, there were a number of young Hollywood personalities that were then known as the Young Turks, which was like Bruce Dern and Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda and Jane Fonda and Sharon Tate and all of them as well. I started digging into all of their backgrounds, and lo and behold, Sharon Tate's dad was, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tate of U.S. military intelligence, and Dennis Hopper's recently come out and acknowledged that his father worked for the OSS, which was the precursor of the CIA. And, like Bruce Dern's, what was his, uncle was like Skull and Bones or something. And I mean, again, every one of them right down the line. And, that can't just be a coincidence, I mean, there had to be other people in the country that were talented. These people made it to the top of the heap for a reason, I believe. I find it very hard to believe that it just coincidental that they happen to all come, virtually all of them come from military intelligence families. It's I'm not a big believer in coincidence theory, so to speak. And I can buy one, some of them now and then, but when time after time, I went through and I traced the family history of each and every one of these people, and when time after time, I just kept, coming up with the same scenario over and over and over again. That just, and then added to the fact that there was this huge covert intelligence complex right there in the midst of, this isolated, remote sort of canyon where they had their own kind of little, close-knit community all clustered around an intelligence complex, and all of them being sons and daughters of the intelligence community. I mean, at some point, the coincidence thing just has to go out the window, you know. So,
oh, absolutely, yeah.
And another thing I want to add, by the way, is that all of the information that's in this series was in the public domain already, you know, in various places, and that's largely true of a lot of my work. You know, what I kind of specialize in is sort of taking this information that's out there and gathering it, you know, together and presenting it in a way that's never been presented before, you know. Because,
yes.
you know, you'll find these little bits and pieces out there. You know, if you're reading a biography of, say, you know, David Crosby or John Phillips or whoever it is, you'll find, you know, little strange little facts that don't seem to fit, you know. But they're just, you know, like in the Laurel Canyon book, they're just sort of tossed aside as these, you know, insignificant little details. But if you gather all of those little details up and put them together and sort of start piecing the puzzle together, an entirely different picture emerges. And so that's sort of the basis of all the work that I do on, you know, on a variety of different topics is just sort of try to present this stuff in a way that nobody else has done before, and hopefully by doing that sort of, you know, break through the wall of resistance and disinformation, and hopefully get through to a few people here and there, and you know.
I think you've succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, the objective is to kind of get a foot in the door, you know. I mean, you got to get that door cracked open, and for different people, it's different things, you know. But once you sort of crack that door open, and you know, people are able to accept, well, okay, maybe I have been lied to about this particular issue, then, you know, they're going to be more inclined to be more open-minded about, you know. That's kind of always been my objective, is to sort of new and fresh kind of way that will hopefully open some eyes out there, and you know.
Well, I think that it has in a lot of ways, and I think that with the kind of, especially with the music industry today, when we see pop stars, you know, openly displaying like occultic symbology and Masonic symbology and all these other things that are probably done simply for shock value, like Lady Gaga and things like this.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, you thinking specifically of Lady?
Well,
yeah, these people, I mean, and they just come out of nowhere, you know.
Yes.
I mean, what is she? All of like 24 years old. A few years ago, she was virtually unknown, and now she's like the biggest thing in the music industry. I mean, she's just absolutely everywhere, and her videos are just loaded with symbolism and you know, her performances and whatnot, and. Yeah, I mean, you know, is the entertainment industry really based on talent, or is it based on you know, putting people into the positions that are going to advance a certain agenda? You know, I tend to think it's mostly the latter. You know, because there's a lot of people out there, not just now, but you know, over the years, that just seem to just become these huge sensations, you know, despite the fact that they don't really seem to be the most talented people out there. Not to my eye in here anyway. And I think it has a lot more to do with who's been groomed for the position than who's the most talented person to fill the position, you know.
Yes, and of course, you know, these people are getting a lot of money to do their promotion and to get them set up and to make them stars and things like this. So one has to wonder, you know, where that money's coming from, and you know, there's always going to be an agenda behind it. And I think what you've illustrated with your Inside the LC stuff is that there's a very strong possibility, if not a certainty, that the military-industrial complex is in fact involved in this very field, and promoting a sort of propaganda or some kind of agenda from behind the scenes. One example from the LC series that comes to mind for me is Jim Morrison, and his father was an admiral, and
I don't know I forgot about him. I don't know how
well, there's so many. I mean, you can't possibly rattle them off the top of your head, I'm sure. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about his story, because one thing that I found very interesting about how you put together the tale of Jim Morrison and the Doors was the fact that he was another person that sort of just appeared right out of the mist, so to speak.
Yeah, he really did. I mean, he had no musical experience. I mean, and he candidly acknowledged that he had no musical experience. He'd never sung before. He claimed that he never even sung like in the shower, and he had no, he couldn't read music, had no songwriting experience, really had no musical background whatsoever. And he was the son of a Navy admiral, and not just any Navy admiral, but the Navy admiral that happened to be in charge of the Pacific Fleet that was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident that drug us headlong into ground war in Vietnam. His dad was the commanding officer of those ships, so he was obviously a direct conspirator in what is widely now regarded as something that didn't even happen.
Yes.
Which was alleged attacks on our gunships that we required our retaliation, supposedly. And so his father was right there in the thick of it. So here's the father, out directly conspiring to escalate the Vietnam War at the very time that the son is put on the scene out of nowhere as this sort of symbol of the peace and love generation. So. And I have there's pictures of him actually seeing his father off as he was getting ready to sail off from Long Beach or somewhere wherever it was that his ship left from. And I mean, the guy is absolutely unrecognizable from the Jim Morrison that was going to emerge just like less than a year later as the Lizard King, this sort of mythical, larger-than-life character. I mean, he literally just came out of nowhere, physically and every other way. I mean, the Jim Morrison that existed not long before that was completely unrecognizable from this guy that suddenly, became this huge sensation, the lead man of the Doors, and it was a remarkable sequence of events there with the father and the son and the timing of all of that, and just a very thought-provoking scenario there with the father and the son. And then, of course, the mysterious death of and that's another thing about this story that we haven't touched upon, is just the withering array of violent deaths that occurred in and around the canyon and to people connected to the canyon in the years that Laurel Canyon sort of had its heyday. And there's this whole image of peace and love and brotherhood and anti-war and flower power and all of that, but at the same time, throughout that whole thing, there was this just very, very dark undercurrent of violence and just bodies turning up left and right, violent deaths just occurring like with uncanny, just constantly, and frequently unexplained, how these deaths occurred. So that's another aspect of the story that just doesn't really fit with the popular image of what the what this whole scene was all about.
Yeah, I agree. And of course the horrible deaths, the murders, the body showing up, all this sort of thing that's associated with Laurel Canyon. And in that particular way, I wanted to ask you if you ever got the sense that there was something associated, particularly with the Laurel Canyon area, which you like maybe a sinister vibe out of there, or do you think this was just the fact that there were a lot of bad people in that area at that time, and this was just the natural result of people doing what they do?
Yeah, I've gotten that question before. Other people have asked, whether this location was chosen for a specific reason. Somebody asked me, was something about like vortexes or something, and I don't. It's not really my area of expertise. I don't know. I couldn't really tell you. I don't know that much about it. My assumption is that it was sort of chosen because it's so isolated. There's basically one road in and one road out, and really it's a slice of L.A. that is completely separate and distinct from the rest of L.A. It's very isolated, very close knit, and like I say, there's basically one way in and one way out, and so it's very remote and very isolated, and so it just, I'd assume that it was chosen for that reason. Whether there's some, sort of metaphysical kind of reason or something as well, I really don't know.
I was just curious if you had like looked into that at all, or if in your research you had come across anything that might have pointed to that. But my sense of it was,
I get emails about it, and I've been asked about it in interviews and stuff. But no, I've never. Nothing in anything I've read that would tend to indicate something like that. But again, it's not really my. Not really my one of my areas of expertise that I've really looked into, so I couldn't really tell you.
Well, it might be very instructive, as you pointed out, to note that it is kind of a remote area, which if someone were to be doing something like with the secret facility up there, it could be a small area that would be easily monitored, and you could monitor who was coming in and who was going out rather easily if there's basically only one way in and one way out. And it could have been viewed as a good place for some type of experimental protocol or something along those lines, if the military or intelligence community was behind a lot of the things that were happening in there.
Well, it certainly appears that way. There was just so much intelligence activity going on. Even beyond the secret facility and the fact that most of the people living there seem to be sons and daughters of the intelligence complex, and I don't know. There were several other things going on. I'm trying to think one of the problems I have is that I've kind of stepped away from this story for a while, and I did the rather lengthy Moon Doggie series, and then I've also actually I have a whole nother series that I haven't even started on. That's all just kind of in my head right now on the Lincoln assassination. So I have all of those.
Oh, that sounds good.
Bouncing around in my head, so I'm trying to get back into the kind of Laurel Canyon mindset. But I know one thing, there was like a male prostitution ring that was centered in Laurel Canyon, and when it got busted, some of the call boys working there said that some of their clientele included high-level politicians and law enforcement personnel, including J. Edgar Hoover. And
yes,
a couple other names that got dropped. So there was kind of like this sort of a Craig Spence type of high-level male prostitution ring catering to the political elite that was also just happened to be, right in the midst of the peace and love scene. And there was a couple other things going on as well. I'm trying to think. I think the beginnings of like the Rand Corporation or something. The people that pioneered the Rand Corporation originally met in Laurel Canyon. I believe, is in one of the chapters, and some other thing as well. I mean, there was just this way too much intelligence, you know, way too many people in the canyon that shouldn't have been there, you know.
Yes.
Based on the, you know, what the hell's J. Edgar Hoover going and, you know, cruising into this thing for to get serviced by, you know, it's just. Yeah, there's just way too many coincidences for it, for there not to be, you know, for a lot of this not to have been planned.
Yeah, that was my sense of what I was looking at in the material that you presented, is the incredible amount of the military intelligence factor involved there, and the sons and daughters all being converged on one place, and you know, these people.
Some of them even knew each other, which was another thing that's you know, I mean, supposedly this was just this sort of this spontaneous, you know, this spontaneous gathering where all these people just happened to, you know, gather here, and the scene sort of grew organically, but. If you look into it, you find out that a lot of them knew each other, you know, and a lot of them, an incredible percentage of them came directly from the Washington D.C. area, you know, which is another weird thing. So, you know, you find that, like you find things like that Jim Morrison went to the same naval kindergarten as Frank Zappa's wife. You know, so they'd known each other since they were like 5 years old. And you find out that John Phillips and Mama Cass Elliott went to the same high school, and that John Phillips was a high school rival of Warren Beatty, who also showed up in the canyon. You know, so you find that you know, maybe this wasn't just a chance gathering. That these people had common backgrounds and connections from very early on, before they ever arrived in Laurel Canyon. So,
yes.
You know, that's another hint that this maybe wasn't the grassroots organic movement that, you know, that we're led to believe.
And then, of course, there's Charles Manson too.
Yeah, and then there's Charles Manson. And John Holmes in the Wonderland murders, which
that's right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, you know, there was a lot of violent deaths surrounding the Laurel Canyon scene, including what are generally regarded by seasoned LAPD homicide investigators as probably the two most brutal, gruesome, most notorious multi-victim murders ever committed in the city, which were the Wonderland murders, in which four drug dealers living in Laurel Canyon and catering to some of the people in Laurel Canyon were bludgeoned to death with lead pipes in a crime that apparently involved porn star John Holmes. You know, so he was part of the scene as well. I mean, and those actually occurred right in the heart of Laurel Canyon, and then you had the Manson murders, which occurred a couple canyons over in Benedict Canyon on Cielo Drive, of course. But all of the principals on both sides, all the victims and the perpetrators, were all Laurel Canyon people. Virtually every one of them. Charlie was known to hang out there all the time. Bobby Beausoleil, one of Manson's right-hand men, had an apartment there. You know, a lot of them were known to hang out in Laurel Canyon. And as far as the victims, Wojtek Frykowski and Abigail Folger actually lived right across the street from Cass Elliott on I think it's Woodrow Wilson Drive, right there in Laurel Canyon. Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were frequent partiers there at John Phillips' home and various other people's homes. Roman Polanski's the one, or Jay Sebring, the hairdresser. He hung out in Laurel Canyon, knew all these people. He was the guy that actually designed Jim Morrison's famous hairdo, you know. So every one of these people, every one of the victims and every one of the killers in the Manson thing were Laurel Canyon locals. They were all very well known, and in fact, a lot of them knew the victims, knew the perpetrators in some cases. They all swam around in these same social circles. So, the two bloodiest, most notorious crimes in the history of the city sort of provided part of the backdrop for this whole, love and peace scene. So, again, there's just there were very, very, very dark undercurrents to this whole scene. Even leaving aside all the intelligence stuff, there was just a lot of it just had a very, very dark underbelly, a lot of occult activity, a lot of violent crime, almost surely connected to the occult activity. And, it was just, it wasn't what we have been led to believe all these years, not even really close, And it wasn't really an anti-war scene, I have direct quotes from some of these people that saying, no, we did not believe in political advocacy, we didn't believe in making political statements and this, it was to me, it's become almost synonymous. People nowadays sort of, to most people, the hippie and flower child scene is kind of synonymous with the anti-war movement, but that wasn't really the case. There was an actual thriving anti-war movement that existed before that scene, and to me, that scene really served to largely dilute that, and rather than, which is completely different than most people's perception, which is that the hippie scene was the anti-war movement.
Yes, and I think that a lot of the groups that came out of Laurel Canyon, as you've indicated, had no interest in taking up any kind of political positions. It sort of ushered in a new era because at that particular time there was a heavy emphasis on using music as a political tool, and there were a lot of songs, a lot of very very important songs that came out of that period of time that were anti-war, were anti-establishment, that actually did serve as an impetus for people to become active in anti-war protesting. And then this entire movement out of Laurel Canyon, with a lot of these artists specifically being apolitical and promoting their music and becoming really big stars and things of this nature, I think a lot of that served as a way to diffuse the idea of using music as a political tool, and took away a lot of the energy that the real anti-war crowd was generating up to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I haven't really even gotten into yet in the series, I don't think I have anyway, is that the Laurel Canyon scene was also really the force that really sort of commercialized the music scene, alternative music scene, or just the music scene in general, really, and sort of took it from a club scene to all the way up to stadiums. That was really the Laurel Canyon bands that did that. Particularly the Eagles was one of the main ones, who was kind of Laurel Canyon's first sort of super group. And but the various others as well. Crosby, Stills, and Nash was another one, which then became Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. And these were sort of the second wave of Laurel Canyon bands, and I haven't really even gotten into them. And they were largely formed from the remnants of the first wave of Laurel Canyon bands. Crosby, Stills, and Nash was made up from the Byrds and Buffalo Springfield. And
yes,
and so. And it was really the second wave of bands that really took music in a whole other direction, and they took it out of the clubs and initially into larger larger arenas, and eventually all the way up to these huge colossal these big huge mega concert sort of things. And that really all came about from the second wave of bands in Laurel Canyon that and you know it was kind of known initially. I mean, and even today it was kind of known as the club scene, you know, and all of these, you know, you had the Whiskey and Pandora's Box and all of these clubs along Sunset Boulevard, where all these Laurel Canyon bands kind of got their start. They'd come down from the canyons, and everybody would hit the Strip at night and you know, play these clubs. But that really didn't last very long, because they very quickly started to outgrow the clubs, and it just became this big, huge commercial enterprise. You know, with and that was largely due to it was largely the doing of the Laurel Canyon scene and these sort of second wave of super groups that were produced there. So it really, to this day, it has completely changed the whole face of the popular music scene.
Yes, I think so. If it was for no other reason than just the fact that there were so many really big names that came out of there, but also the fact that the modern marketing techniques and the really big shows and the super groups and all that kind of stuff that come out of there, as you said, forming from the remnants of the first wave. And of course, as you noted, so many of the other things that were going on there. I mean, one particular thing that has always struck me as rather interesting. I'm looking here in part 3 where you list some of the deaths that have occurred in or around Laurel Canyon or associated with it, and one particular name jumps out at me because I've seen it in connection with some other things as well, and that is Marina Hobby, Marina Elizabeth Hobby, who is the she was 17 at the time of her death, and she was the daughter of Hans Hobby, who emigrated to the U.S. from Austria around 1940.
Yeah, she was like tossed down a ravine. Her body was actually recovered in Laurel Canyon, right, in like circa 1969 or something like that.
Yes, and the
other body was actually recovered from almost the same spot, like a year earlier or a year later or something like that. But that one, that girl has never attained the notoriety of. I actually just read something about Marina just like a week ago or something. Something. I guess her family hooked up with like Maury Terry or something to try to solve her murder, like many years.
Oh, really?
Later. That's what I read. Something about that. Yeah, I mean, you know Maury Terry, right? He did the Medieval and looked into the Son of Sam and the Manson and all these sort of related. And yeah, they went to him, I guess, or something for some assistance, you know, to see what you know, whether he could lend any assistance, and because I guess the family is apparently, or at least factions of it, believe that it was connected to the Manson gang,
and that's where
you know, and possibly the wider network, which according to Terry included the Son of Sam gang and Manson 2 and the Cotton Club murders and you know, various other you know, sordid goings on.
Yes,
but
indeed.
yeah, I don't know what have you
That was the angle that I was looking at, that in fact that had been connected tenuously by some other researchers to Manson and to the family or the wider network of the family, and I don't know why it is, but for some reason her murder particularly stands out to me, and I don't know why per se. I mean, it's almost as if. It's almost as if her death is kind of like a signal of some kind. I don't know. It might just be that I've seen it come up in a certain number of places, and it just stuck in my mind. But that particular one was one that always intrigued me.
The fact that it keeps coming up, and that a lot of these other, curious deaths have been long forgotten, would kind of tend to indicate that it had some sort of significance of some kind, possibly an occult significance or something. To someone, it's important to some group or something, because it does seem to live on, whereas some of these other curious deaths are just, of people that were at the time far more well known, and that have just, and that's another thing that I point out is that some of the people that were regarded as like huge stars in the earliest days just sort of faded away or met untimely deaths, and they're like all but forgotten now. Judy Sill, I think, is one that I'm thinking of that had a very odd life arc and was regarded as a huge talent, and she came to some kind of curious end. I can't even think of what it is now, but she's like completely forgotten, and various others who, like I say, were at the time were fairly well known, and now they're like completely forgotten. Whereas this girl who was unknown at the time, her name lives on. 42 years later, she's still being talked about on the web. So, there's got to be some reason for that, I would think.
Yeah, well, as you said earlier, I mean, there's very little stock to be placed in coincidence. So if something keeps coming up,
I'm pretty well convinced these days that almost everything happens for a reason. It may not be readily apparent. They may, even 50 years from now, they may not be apparent to most of us. But everything has a meaning for the most part.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that whenever things keep coming up like this, it's like a message to tell you that there's something there. It needs to be looked at, and maybe that's why her particular name stood out to me. But of course, there's so many others. I mean, Mama Cass Elliott, of course, as you noted, the Manson murders themselves, Graham Parsons. I mean, there are so many people.
And it's weird that so many people still today believe that Mama Cass died choking on a ham sandwich or something. It's basically an urban legend. I mean, that's not even the official cause of death. And then there's the question of whether the official cause of death is actually the real cause of death, because Mama Cass knew a lot of people and probably knew a lot of stuff that she shouldn't have known. I mean, she was, like I said, she lived right across the street from Folger and Frykowski, and according to people like Ed Sanders and Maury Terry, Manson and his crew hung out at her house. So she was sort of the go-between between the victims and the killers. And so, you would think that Mama Cass knew a lot more than she should have known. I mean, she was actually at one time listed as a defense witness in the Manson trials. John Phillips was as well. I mean, that's how closely tied they were to the whole Manson scene. Of course, they were never called, but they were listed as potential defense witnesses. So she was very, very, very close to that whole sordid goings on, and then a few years later she shows up dead in a London flat. The exact same room in the same flat that Keith Moon overdosed in, strangely enough, which is also kind of weird.
Yes, it is.
And there was a flat owned by Harry Nilsson, John Lennon's buddy, who was also a Laurel Canyon. He didn't live there, but he occasionally hung out there. He was, one of the people that kind of came and went, and it was his home that they both. Same room in the same flat they both died in. So, that's a little odd, to say the least.
Yes, I would say so. But considering the ferocity of some of these murders, I mean, you just have to wonder. I mean, it seems like that the people that were killed in very horrific ways, let's see, Amy Gossage, who was Graham Nash's girlfriend, murdered in her San Francisco home on February 13th, 1975. and she was stabbed.
Oh yeah, was that the weird one that they pinned it on the brother or something?
They said she was stabbed nearly 50 times and bludgeoned beyond recognition. Let's see.
Yeah, that was an odd one.
Yeah, it was pinned on Eben. The police had conveniently found blood-stained clothes along with a hammer and scissors sitting on the porch of Eben's apartment, looking very much as though it had been planted. A friend of Eben's would later remark, perhaps quite tellingly, "If Eben did kill her, I'm convinced he doesn't know he did it." So
yeah, that's kind of an odd quote, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, why would
so there was definitely something going on in that family. Yeah, she ended up just butchered beyond recognition, and he ended up like getting thrown in institutionalized or something, right? And so but there's just so many of those, you know. I think Jackson Brown's wife or girlfriend, quite a few of the wives and girlfriends came to rather tragic ends. Yeah, there's no shortage of those kind of stories surrounding this whole Laurel Canyon scene.
Oh, it's so true. You had mentioned the Young Turks earlier, and one of the particular characters that really stood out to me was Jack Nicholson, actually, who has such an enigmatic childhood, and sort of his rise to fame, if you will, was kind of a strange affair in and of itself. And here's another guy who had connections with a lot of these people at that time when he was, you know, really on his way up to eventually become such a big star that he did. And
he was actually very closely tied to. I was surprised, actually. I had no idea, and I'm sure a lot of other people didn't, that he was such a key part of that scene, and kind of was one of the people that sort of provided the bridge between, you know, like music and film. And he actually he wrote he wrote the Monkees movie, right? Head, I think. He actually wrote the. Weirdly enough, the Monkees being another Laurel Canyon band, and he also had a lot of involvement in The Trip, right, which was filmed in Laurel Canyon. I think it was filmed in the home of Arthur Lee and the band Love, which was another big Laurel Canyon band, and involved various other Young Turks. Yeah, so he was very much, and then of course he appeared in Easy Rider, which was partly filmed in Laurel Canyon and largely inspired by Laurel Canyon. You know, the two lead characters were supposedly modeled after who was it? David Crosby. Dennis Hopper was basically playing a version of David Crosby, and Peter Fonda was Roger McGuinn of the Byrds, I believe it was who those two characters were based on. So Nicholson was very much a part of that, and still to this day lives just off of Laurel Canyon on Mulholland Drive, just right on the outskirts of Laurel Canyon. He still to this day lives there in a huge, very private estate. And he was a very, very major player, and he had a very unusual upbringing, and which I actually don't remember all the details of, other than the fact that he found out supposedly many, many years later that the woman that raised him wasn't actually his mother. She was like his sister or something like that, or just some...
Yeah, it was almost like
kind of weird family dynamic going on there.
Very much so. It was very much like Chinatown, the movie he eventually did. I mean, basically the secret plot of the movie, the final revelation, was sort of like the same kind of thing that Nicholson came out of. That
and of course who else was involved in that film was Roman Polanski.
Oh yes.
So it just goes around and around in circle. That's what I found, is that in researching and writing this, I just kept going around and around in circles. It's kind of a difficult story to tell in a way, because it's not not like a real linear kind of story. It just sort of loops around and continuously loops, and you just keep coming back to the same people, the same names, the same dates. Everything's connected to everything.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that that kind of circular looping back, once you follow one particular person, then it's going to lead to another, and then another, and then all of a sudden you're back where you started again, with the same characters and the same scene and all this sort of thing, which is just an amazing aspect of this whole story. Now, you had taken a break from doing anything on the LC for a while, but thankfully, for all of us who are huge fans, you did post something on May 26th this year, and I'd noticed that you were talking about the Black Dahlia. And the reason that the Black Dahlia, otherwise known as Elizabeth Short, was something for me which is kind of interesting, because we were talking about coincidences, and you had mentioned that you had just read something about Marina Hobby, and I had just been talking with a friend of mine about the Black Dahlia, because we were actually quite astounded to see that the famous Swedish nanny murder up in New York had that woman was actually cut in half the same way the Black Dahlia was. Now, there was no big presentation like there was at her death scene. In fact, they never recovered her lower half yet, the Swedish nanny, that is. And it always struck me as rather odd that it seems like such a... why would you go to such lengths... if you want to kill somebody, but why would you cut them in half? That always just struck me as so much overkill, and there being something so much more to it than that. And I think by talking about Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, I think you're pointing out the fact that that what was going on in Laurel Canyon actually was going on prior to the whole music scene and everything that you've outlined in all the previous work on Laurel Canyon. And maybe you could touch on your latest post there and tell us how you came to put that together.
Well, yeah, the Black Dahlia, talk about a case that's never going to die. That's one that's always going to be around, and I'm presumably will always remain unsolved. It's been 64 years or something. It's hard to believe that it was all the way back in 1947, but yeah, that is. I think that will always stand as one of the most notorious crimes, not just in the city of LA, but in the entire country, if not in the entire world. You talk about overkill. It's just unbelievable what was done to that girl. Just cutting her in half, draining her blood. Slicing and posing her and slicing off one of her nipples, and just an absolutely horrendous display. And then left just literally a couple feet from the sidewalk. Where anybody taking their morning stroll is gonna encounter this absolutely just unfathomably horrid scene. So yeah, that one's always going to that one's probably always going to be around. But as far as connection to the Laurel Canyon, it's sort of an indirect connection, but a connection nonetheless. In that, strangely enough, John Phillips' second wife, Michelle Phillips, his first wife was actually Susie Adams, who was a direct descendant of Presidents John Adams and John Quincy Adams. But his second wife, the one that everyone knows, was Holly Michelle Gilliam, who became Michelle Phillips. And she had a very interesting upbringing. Her father was this very kind of shadowy character that I don't even know what he did for a living. It depends on what source you just very, very unusual guy who traveled a lot and took new wives, constantly. He had 6 wives, and most of them very young. One of them was only 16 when he married her, and he already had an adult daughter at the time. But there's a lot of that going around actually in this story, in this particular branch of the story particularly. But anyway, her mother died when she was very young, just like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years old or something, reportedly of a brain aneurysm, and she was raised thereafter by this sort of shadowy father figure until she was about 14, at which time she sort of was taken under the wing by a woman who, to this day, she still considers her surrogate mother and very close friend, who was Tamar Hodel, who just happens to be the daughter of George Hodel, who has been identified in 2 different books as the Black Dahlia murderer. Now, that will always be debated, of course, and a lot of people have a vested interest in pointing the finger at their suspect. There's been numerous books written on the case and numerous suspects identified, and a lot of people have tried to pin it on various people and adamantly defended that point of view. So, I mean, there's never going to be any kind of consensus on whether he was or was not the most likely suspect, but he certainly, to me, seems to be a more credible suspect than a lot of the other people that have been identified. For one thing, he was a surgeon, and it's long been said of the case that this girl was sort of butchered with surgical precision, and various other factors as well that would tend to indicate that he could very well have been involved. And beyond that, he was also an incestuous pedophile, apparently. His own daughter took him to court in the 40s and charged him with not only molesting her himself, but of passing her around to his high society friends, like the artist Man Ray and famed actor and director John Huston. And I mean, it's just, if you've looked into a lot of this stuff, and unfortunately I spent many years looking into it when I was researching Program to Kill. I say unfortunately because once you kind of get this stuff in your head, unfortunately you can't get it back out, and whether you really need to know all of that, I sometimes wonder if it would be better to go back to having my head stuck in the sand. But if you've looked into this sort of organized, ritualized child abuse kind of cases, all of this sounds just very, very familiar. The pedophilic orgies and the people, the very wealthy elite people involved in it, and all of this kind of stuff. I mean, it all has a very familiar ring to it. So.
Yes, it does.
This guy was a very, very, he was not a good person. Whether he was the Black Dahlia murderer or not, we'll probably never know for sure. But to me, a lot of the pieces seem to fit. And if so, then, that basically... Is my phone dying?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. You're cutting out a little bit here and there.
My phone just stopped beeping. I don't know actually. I don't know what kind of lifespan what kind of battery life this phone has, but it's beeping at me. So hopefully I don't lose you. If I do, I guess we might have to finish on my cell phone.
Okay. Well, if I do lose you,
I don't know. I guess I'm okay. We gave me like a couple of warning beeps, but anyway. So yeah, if this guy was in fact the Black Dahlia killer, then basically the surrogate mother of Michelle Phillips of the Mamas and Papas was directly connected to the Black Dahlia murder. So in addition to the Manson and the Wonderland murders, which were directly connected to Laurel Canyon, there's a possibility that the Black Dahlia killing was indirectly connected to Laurel Canyon. So you have all 3 of Los Angeles' most notorious, bloody, gruesome, murders, all 3 connected to this peace and love scene.
Yeah, and I think I can definitely relate to what you're saying, Dave, about wanting to put your head back in the sand sometimes, and not know these sorts of things and realize just how horrible and evil things are, but considering the work that you've done, the research that I've done, which is not nearly as in depth as what you've done, but clearly I can understand that completely. I mean, to have the images of these people dying and the terrible murders and all the different things that have happened in history, it's just such an awful thing, and it's hard to deal with sometimes.
Yeah, I thought I had a pretty good grasp of how the world worked like 15 years ago. I thought I was pretty well informed, and I was horrified by what I knew. But some of the rabbit holes I've gone down in the last 10 years are far, far darker than anything that I could have imagined. You kind of got to wonder sometimes if I can't do anything about this, if we're really powerless to do anything about this, do I really even want to know? What do I do with this information now that I have it? And it can't be unlearned. You can never go back. You can't crawl back up the rabbit hole. They only go one way.
That's true. That's true. You can't. You might as well use it for the best that you can, and that is to give people the information, to let them know, to hopefully let other people know who want to take that trip themselves, and give them the tools that they need so they can hopefully come to understand some of the more insidious aspects of history, and maybe by providing a resource, you're actually doing a really good thing, because you're letting people take it, as far as they want. You know what I mean? If they just want to touch on it, they can do that. If they want to go deeper, they can do that too. And it's really up to the person whether or not they want to do that. And I think just providing the information and making the connections is a tremendously important thing, and it can open people's eyes in a way to the world around them that they hadn't seen before, and so I think that's really the best that you can do in any of these situations, is just to keep doing what you're doing, and to make the connections that you make, and hopefully serve as a kind of like a place, a resource that people can use to explore for themselves if they dare to do that. And they should also be very aware, as you point out, that you can't put it back in the bottle once it's out.
You can't, and even if they're resistant now, they could, and like I say, I consider myself to be pretty well informed, 10, 15 years ago, but at that time I gave no credence whatsoever to concepts like mind control or sort of these occult-based secret societies or organized multi-perpetrator pedophile rings, operating at elite levels and stuff like that. But the thing that's surprising that never ceases to amaze me is how much, if you do some digging, if you're determined to really get to the bottom of some of this stuff, it's amazing how much you can actually find in mainstream publications, little bits and pieces that, like I said before, you pick those up and string them together, and next thing you know, you got a story, and like the first section, the first like 6 chapters of my Program to Kill book are basically about like elite pedophile rings, and I have scores of I deliberately try to steer away from referencing like other conspiracy theorists or websites or you're not going to find like citations in my books from like Conspiracies Are Us or something like that. I try to. My goal is to try to demonstrate to people that if you, just by relying on mainstream sources, magazines, newspapers, books, and picking up the right pieces and putting the puzzle together in a different way, there is a case to be made. You know, there is proof out there. It does exist. It's just they don't want you to put those pieces together. You know.
That's why it's not done in the mainstream media, and that's why what you do, Dave, is so important, because you're able to make the connections that a lot of people who may be aware of the bits and pieces but don't realize that they connect to others that make a bigger picture or a bigger tapestry for people to look at. That's a crucial role that you're playing by putting this stuff together and making the connections that people are unaware of because they don't have the time to look at it. I mean, they might read about something here or there, but they never realize that it's part of a bigger picture, and that can really, change your life in a way to understand, exactly what's happening around the world. I mean, you look at everything today. I mean, politics and economics and everything that's happening right now is, it's reflected very strongly in the material that you've written about. I mean, it could be written about today. I'm sure if you chose to take another topic for something now, you could probably do the same thing, because there's all of these types of things are part of bigger and grander things that are going on around us all the time. And Laurel Canyon, and Laurel Canyon is just another example of that. And the amount of effort you should put into putting all that together just shows the reality of it and how it can be extrapolated to our time and to any of the various particular things that are going on today, and that's a very important thing to about.
Even the Lincoln assassination, which I mentioned, I mean, that's a story that's 150 years old. That 99.9% of the American people know almost nothing about that, other than that John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln in Ford's Theater or whatever, and. It's amazing how many aspects of that story are directly relatable to what's going on now with our government, and the kind of lies that we're told, and the kind of things that were going on the periphery, sort of that assassination. The parallels to today are just. They're astounding in some cases, I mean, like the guy that supposedly shot John Wilkes Booth, for example, which I don't believe that he actually did, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, this guy Sergeant Boston Corbett, he's the guy he's sort of the Jack Ruby of the Lincoln assassination. He's the guy that was on the posse, the special military detachment that was sent out to bring Booth back alive to stand trial, and against standing orders, he's the guy that supposedly shot and killed John Wilkes Booth, thereby circumventing a trial and all that good stuff. A very Jack Ruby-ish move, to say the least. But the interesting thing about this guy is that many, many years later, he showed up in, I believe it was Kentucky. He got a job as like the doorman of the Kentucky State Legislature, and a couple of weeks later, the dude shows up to work brandishing 2 handguns and shot the place up. Now, when does that ever happen today? All the time.
Yes, it does.
Whether it's a school or a post office or a military base or Virginia Tech or, whatever it is, or, Jared Lee Lochner supposedly, showing up at, whatever it is, that happens all the time now. But it was astounding to me to find out that it happened back in like 1873 or 1888, or I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but sometime after the assassination, this guy who played a key role in that, and who also had a history of reporting that he heard voices in his head, and various other things that would tend to indicate some kind of mind control going on, even though according to most people that sort of thing didn't even exist until like post World War II. which I don't think is the case at all. But anyway, here you have this guy who was a key player in the Lincoln assassination, who years later, who walks around hearing voices in his head, and then something triggers him years later, and he shows up at the legislature and starts shooting up the place. So
that's amazing.
It's astounding that the more things change, the more they stay the same, as they say, and it's just amazing how much hasn't changed, in 150 years, which is why that story is like my current obsession now, and I've been delving ever deeper into that rabbit hole. But anyway, that's kind of a little off topic. But anyway,
well, that's fine.
The point being that yeah, I mean, even you find these direct parallels no matter where you look, and even if you go back 150 years, so
yes. And I'm with you as far as mind control goes, Dave. There's a very old case involving a guy called James Matthew Tilley, I think his name was. He's the guy of the Heirloom Gang, if that rings a bell with you. As a guy who lived in England, he said there was a group of people called the Heirloom Gang who were using a device called the Heirloom, which was sending waves into his head to make him go crazy. And it involved a couple of relatively prominent people in the town or city that he lived in, and that was back in the earlier 1800s, I believe. Now, it could be that he was just crazy. Certainly entirely possible that he was just completely nuts. But the fact that he had come up with this grand scenario involving this gang of people who were operating a device that he took pains to describe and actually sketched it out for the people who were supposedly treating him, or there wasn't really much treatment back at that time. It pretty much just locked you up. But, the stories of people influencing people's minds certainly go back beyond the 1950s. And
I think the basics of mind control have been known and sort of passed down through these, occult-based, quote-unquote Masonic, whatever you want to call them, secret societies. Mm-hmm. And through families, through multi-generational, occult families. I think this stuff has been passed down for a long time, and I think what the MK Ultra project and all of its sub-projects that began, like in the 50s or whatever, that everybody points to as kind of the beginning of this, I think that was more about sort of refining and quantifying the methods that were already known, and just as importantly, I think one of the key goals was to sort of expand it to like a kind of a society on a society-wide level, to sort of inflict trauma-based mind control on the entire population. And yes. I believe that the Kennedy assassination was, at least in part, sort of a countrywide MK Ultra project. It was a trauma-based, it was an effort to traumatize, to inflict mass trauma on the entire country.
I agree with you.
Thereby affect a change in direction,
I absolutely agree with that.
A lot of what we see today is direct outgrowths of those efforts to study ways to sort of expand this into a more society-wide thing, and the whole notion of like serial killers and spree killers and now terrorists, and it's just a means of constantly keeping the people in fear and constantly traumatizing the people to affect the changes that they want to affect, and it's become more and more prominent. It's almost become now where there's like no recovery time, It's like they almost want to keep us, permanently traumatized. You barely recover from one thing, and it's on to something else,
That's true. And I agree with you 100% on the Kennedy assassination. I do view it that way. I think it is, partially at least, certainly part of what happened there. That, especially being assassinated the way he was, and the various films of it and everything that have been shown time and time again, and all of that was part of it.
Yeah, it did not have to be done that publicly and filmed and replayed for 50 years.
Yeah.
Still going, I mean, it was done very publicly and very, I mean, I think that I kind of thought that Obama was being set up the same way, to be honest with you. I mean, to me, looking back on it, I was only like 3 years old when Kennedy was assassinated, so it's not something that I have like a lot of personal recollections of, but looking back on it, I mean, it seems like to me like the people were really sort of encouraged to just idolize this guy, and almost like and when he was killed, to a lot of people it was almost like a family member had died, and the whole country really was very much in mourning, for quite a while, and we're very traumatized by it, and one of my fears was that Obama was kind of being set up for the same thing. He sort of kind of took the office as with all this sort of hero worship, and he was young and idealistic and charismatic, and he had all these avid followers and everybody loved him, and I'm like, shit, they're gonna whack this guy. This is gonna be a Kennedy repeat, but little did I know that they were actually going to use him in another way, that he was going to be like, the alternative George Bush.
Yeah, Manchurian candidate.
But yeah, I mean, to me, both of the Kennedy assassinations were kind of multiple levels of mind control, in that the guys who took the rap, Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan, almost for sure. There's still articles that come out now to this day from his attorney and whatnot saying that he was, mind controlled, and so I mean the perpetrator / patsies were themselves mind control, and then on a larger level, the whole operation was kind of a countrywide attempt at control, and at traumatizing, encouraging the people to fall in love with something and then taking it away from them, which is the kind of stories you hear if you've researched like ritual child abuse and stuff like that, trauma, which is sort of the basis for trauma-based mind control. You find that's how it works. The perpetrator will give the kid a pet or something, a dog, and encourage him to fall in love with it, and then slaughter the thing right in front of him,
Yes.
To traumatize the kid,
Yeah.
and so to me, I think the Kennedy assassination was very much sort of a countrywide effort at doing just that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure there were other motives as well.
Sure.
I mean, it'll be debated endlessly. Was he going to disband the CIA? Was he going to end the war in Vietnam? Was he going to normalize relations with Cuba? Blah, 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 blah. And, I don't really know whether he was or not, but and I'm sure there were other motives, but I think that one of the motives was definitely to traumatize the nation,
Yes. I agree. That I agree that as being a part of it. But since you mentioned mind control, I wondered if we could just touch on the Apollo stuff for a minute. Now, it's quite clear. Obviously, I've looked at the Apollo missions myself pretty in depth over the years and read many books on it. But I really appreciate the way you put together your material, and as I said, I really love the sarcasm that you have in your writing, because I mean it deserves it. It deserves it.
Yeah, I think I always write with a heavy dose of sarcasm. I always try to throw some humor in, even in the serial killer book, which is very, very dark. There's occasional humor, although not nearly as much as in some of my other writing, because it's just such a dark and grim subject. But for the most part, I always try to inject as much humor into my writing as I can on the principle that what was the Mary Poppins thing of spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down or something.
There you go.
But the Apollo one, I think really sort of brought out much more of that than normal, just because to me it's just so ridiculous. I mean,
it is.
You know, after looking into it, I mean, it's almost kind of like the adult version of believing in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. I mean, it's so absurd to me.
Especially in the ensuing decades, and the way you point out the fact that the various proposals that have come forward since that time by NASA as efforts to like go back to the moon and things like this, and they're going on and on about how it will take us 20 years to be able to do that, and as you pointed out, there were 3 additional missions ready to go. They had the rockets all ready, the lunar modules all ready, and the crews all ready. 3 more missions ready to go to the moon after they stopped going, and all of a sudden now with all of our advanced technology. We can't possibly do that for decades. It would require all incredible work.
I've always problem. Yeah, it's just, why don't you roll one of those Saturn V's out and fuel it up? You know, they work just fine. Why reinvent the wheel? It amazes me that every time an announcement comes out about some new highfalutin plan that NASA has, it invariably directly contradicts the notion that we've already been there. You know, that, well, we can do this, but it's gonna take 20 years of research and development, and we still have to solve the radiation problem. We still have to solve the reentry problem. We don't know how to deal with the lunar dust, and well, wait a minute. How come we knew all that 40 years? And none of the reporters ever say a damn thing. You know, it's like how come nobody ever sticks up their hand and says, "Excuse me, can't we use the technology we had back in 1969?" You know, I mean, it amazes me that everyone just blindly accepts these pronouncements without having any realization, apparently, that they're contradicting themselves in these statements. You know, it's
I know. It's almost like they want you to believe that everybody who had anything to do with that was all like just knowledge that they had. They're all dead now. We can't reconstruct it, and that technology was just so incredibly advanced. And I encourage anybody who's not seen, if I could just for a second, if anybody who has not read your Wagging the Moon Doggie series, definitely go and check it out. But if you do nothing else, have a look at the close-up photographs of the lunar module, okay? And you tell me if we have the technology to put together something like that, because this thing supposedly landed on the moon, and it looks like something a bunch of kids threw together as sort of like a backyard kind of like shack for them to hang out in.
It does. It looks like somebody put it together to make some kind of hokey YouTube video or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's astounding, and we're supposed to believe that these things not only landed on the moon, but then took off from the moon, completely untested. You know, I mean, it's never been done before or since. It couldn't be tested because we don't have those conditions here to test it. And when it was supposedly tested here, they couldn't even get the thing to work right in Earth's atmosphere where we know the known conditions. But supposedly they took them up there and they worked flawlessly every time. And I mean, there's just so many things about the story that are almost just, well, they are just laughable, if subjected to any kind of scrutiny, and yet they defend that. Well, NASA doesn't really so much defend it themselves. They have these various people, debunkers out there that they claim aren't really connected to them, but they obviously are, because NASA pretty much defers to them and lets them do all of their debunking, and my theory, as I stated in the thing, is the reason that they do that is because they know that the debunking arguments have no scientific validity, and they don't want to, they don't want to go on record as standing behind stuff that's obviously bad science, but yet they want to, deflect the critics, so they just sort of defer to these unofficial, debunkers. But yeah, I mean, they will viciously attack anyone that questions Apollo. I mean, holy shit, they opened up this whole discussion forum while I was posting the articles, and it ran to like I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of posts from all of these debunkers that were just fretting over all these things that I was saying. And yeah, it's a paper thin story. I mean, if you really look at it, I honestly don't know how anybody that's really looked into it could believe it. It's just so ridiculous, for so many reasons.
Yeah, well, as far as pointing out all of the ludicrous nature of it, the Wagging the Moon Doggie series is very good for doing that. But when I segued into this subject, we were talking about mind control, and there are two aspects to this that I wanted to ask you about. One is the astronauts themselves. I mean, there's been speculation by others that the astronauts had been subjected to some kind of mind control to make them actually think that they were on the moon at some point in time. And then the other thing is the idea of this entire spectacle being another sort of level of nationwide propaganda or mind control effort in some regard. What are your thoughts on that?
As far as the astronauts, I think that's quite possible. I've never seen any definitive proof, but then again, very unlikely that any evidence in that regard would ever be available. Mm-hmm. But I think that's highly likely that they could very well have been. I mean, they may very well have put them through the motions of sort of doing a mock landing and through various techniques, convince them that it was real. It's possible. I don't know. It's hard to say. They definitely seem very, very uncomfortable. And I don't know if you've ever seen on YouTube the initial press conference they did after they kept them in seclusion for a couple of weeks. They rolled them out, Aldrin and Armstrong and Collins, and had this press conference, and they sure seemed uncomfortable and nervous. I mean, they looked very much like they were thinking, can we really sell this? I mean, are they really expecting us to sell this story to the people? And so I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say how their silence was secured, so to speak.
Well, it's interesting to note that Armstrong has pretty much been almost totally incommunicado, and of course,
he just really became a recluse and doesn't do interviews. And Aldrin for a while became a raging drunk, and now he seems to be getting out there all over the place. And Collins he just sort of drifted off into obscurity, I think. Him being the one of the three that didn't supposedly get a land on the moon. And all three of them seem to have had some serious adjustment problems afterwards. And is that due to a guilty conscience? Is it due to the fact that their minds have been screwed with? It's hard to say.
So then, with all of the various things that you've pointed out, the technology and the things it's just quite astounding that all of these things being untested, and they go to the moon and they land there, and they come back safe with all their equipment and the moon rocks and all the other things that they have, and totally untested, and everything works flawlessly except for Apollo 13. But that could be another story all to itself. But what do you believe? What do you believe is the ultimate purpose behind the Apollo program, as it were, taking it as a totally made up scenario? What is it that they were trying to accomplish with the charade that they were playing?
Multiple goals being pursued. I think one was definitely to distract from the wildly unpopular Vietnam War. And if you look at the timing of the launch of these, which is one thing I do in this series, is go through and point out how closely the launches correlated with like key revelations coming out of the war that they wanted to distract attention away from, and just the war in general and the unpopularity of it, and to sort of, boost Nixon's poll ratings and sort of generate this kind of rally around the flag phenomenon, and just, build some national spirit and all that sort of stuff. I think that was probably a goal, almost for sure a goal. I think also that the project probably had a lot more to do with pursuing military goals than pursuing space flight. I think it was kind of really sort of the early days of the whole Star Wars kind of notion, and sort of taking baby steps towards the militarization of space. And I think that's where a lot of that money actually went. And, under cover of this sort of civilian feel-good project, it was actually the beginnings of militarizing space. So I think those were probably two of the key goals, and there could very well have been others, but I think those were definitely two of the goals that were being pursued.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that the military aspects of it. Especially when you look at the technology that's being used there. Like we noted, the lunar module itself looks like something a bunch of kids built. It literally looks like someone just stapled up like cardboard to the side of the thing, and it's got all this foil on there. You don't even know what's underneath that.
Yeah, the walls of the thing are like made of mylar or something. It's like a couple mils thick or something. They actually said they had to be careful when they were working on it, because if they dropped a tool, it would go right through the bottom of the.
Yeah, and this is supposed to be.
And yet this is sent out into the vacuum of space, where all it would take was a pinhole, and you're instantly dead.
Yeah, and of course
you're gonna travel for 10 days or what? You're gonna travel around in this thing where one misplaced elbow means like instant death, or one meteoroid, or one, anything. It's just, the whole thing is just absurd. And you mentioned being untested, and in fact, one of the most amazing things that I discovered was that the liftoff engine for the lunar module, the engine that supposedly took them off the moon, not only were never tested, they were never even fired up, because the fuel was so corrosive that they could only be burned once, and then they were no good anymore. The whole engine had to be rebuilt. So they built these things in the factory without even, supposedly just built them, installed them without even test firing them, and sent them up on the assumption that they were going to fire up the first time and get them off the moon. Who is going to do that? That's just insane to even think that they would have actually done that, and then to have them work flawlessly every single time. Now we can't even build a space shuttle that they can launch without blowing it up. But, back then we could send untested engines to the moon, and they fired up first time every time,
And as you pointed out, too, apparently back then they had muscle spaceships.
We got there a lot faster then, too. Yeah, now they're saying it's going to take a lot longer to... the arrogance of faking it is just mind-boggling. They must have. Presumably, they must have thought at the time, well, at some point in the future, we're actually going to be able to do this. So we'll just make it as accurate as possible based on what we know now, and it'll fit in later or whatever. But now here we are. 40 some years later, and nobody's ever come close to duplicating it. And if they ever do, it's going to be so completely different, every aspect of the mission is going to be just so completely different than the way. That's one reason that even if we had the technological capability to actually do it now, I don't know that they would want to, because it would be so far removed, in any film they shot there or any pictures, or everything would be so completely different than what was previously sold, to the American people, that they almost really can't do it again. Even if we had the technology, which we don't, I don't know that they could ever do it again, or maybe with enough passage of time that people forget or something. And I don't know. How long can you sell that story? That's one of the things I point out. What if another 50 years go by and we, after 100 years, are people are then they going to wake up? Or are they going to look back and go, how the hell did we do that back then? With the technology we had.
Yeah. Our advanced technology
that story has a certain shelf life, that it can't live on forever without ever being duplicated. So it was a pretty arrogant move to fake it, and at some point you would think it's going to come back and bite them in the butt, but who knows? They have the ability to sell almost anything to the American people these days, it seems. So
yeah, and we're seeing a lot of that right now, especially. I see it every day. I see.
Yeah, I see stuff all the time that I think, well, maybe this will finally be the straw that broke the camel's back, because there's no way anybody's going to believe this. But they do.
And then you're
time after time after time.
And then you're disappointed yet again, like I am, that people are not shouting out their windows. Wait a minute, this is bull crap. I ain't buying this. But yet people...
Yeah, I read stuff in the paper every day that just leaves me shaking my head going, really? Okay. Well, I guess people are buying it. But, yeah, that's... from the point of view of the powers that be, that's the beauty of the American system, is that they've built this just incredibly effective propaganda machine, coupled with the indoctrinated belief that the vast majority of Americans have, that we're kind of special over here, and unlike other countries, we don't have to question our media and our government, and we can be safe that we've got this free and fair media, and they're keeping an eye on and the Republicans are keeping an eye on the Democrats, and the Democrats are and blah blah blah. And we have all these checks and balances, and we don't really have to worry, because stuff like that doesn't happen here. But it does happen here.
Yes, it does.
Every single day.
It sure does.
But the people are, they have done an excellent job of building this propaganda machine, and an excellent job of selling to the people the notion that we're special, and that we can follow different rules here than the rest of the world. And
yes.
That's the beauty of this. These people aren't stupid. They're very intelligent, and they've had a very, very long time to work. They got a big head start on the rest of us that are trying to figure things out. So,
yes, they do. And they got a lot of money and a lot of influence and a lot of power to do things that we just don't have at our disposal. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's another aspect too. Just one final note on the Apollo thing, and then we'll wrap up the show. I wanted to ask you if you had looked into any of the Masonic angles to the whole thing, like the timing and associated with Masonic ritual, or the fact that I think all the astronauts, or if not all of them, practically all of them, were Masons. Have you ever looked into that particular aspect of it?
Not really so much, no. I've actually had people tell me that despite all the flaws in the story, that they believe that we did go there just because it has such strong either Masonic or occult symbolism. The whole notion of reaching the moon or something. But no, it's not something that I've really looked into much at all. No.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to give you a chance to comment on that if you had, because
I know
of
there's
course
one picture that I included that seems like staged with some, like sort of Masonic symbolism, where they took a picture of the flag supposedly on the moon, and the way that it's draped, it's sort of in a pyramid shape, and then the moon's right above it, so it kind of creates this symbolic version of the all-seeing eye over the pyramid.
Ah, yes,
one of the
I recall.
photos, and that looked very deliberately staged that way to me. So there's that one aspect that I did stumble across, but beyond that, no, I haven't really looked into it in any depth at all. No.
Well, in any case, what you have put together is great, and anybody that's listening who has not read that, definitely go take a look at it. If for no other reason.
Even if you think I'm totally full of crap, you'll at least be entertained.
Oh my goodness, yeah, the writing is fantastic. If you like sarcasm, you got to read that, because it is just dripping with it, and rightfully so, because what he's pointing out is just so ludicrous whenever you look at it. It's just ridiculous, and then, like I said, it doesn't even matter if you believe we went to the moon or not. It's a great story to read, so check it out. And also inside the LC, and I'll remind you again that Dave's website is davesweb.cnchost.com. That's davesweb.cnchost.com. And you can find Inside the LC there, and you can also find Wagging the Moon Doggie. And presumably in sometime in the future, we're going to have a new series on Lincoln, which sounds really fascinating. And of course, don't forget that Dave does have 3 books that he put out, as I mentioned earlier. It's Programmed to Kill.
Actually out of print. The Railing Democracy is actually out of print, but the other 2 are still currently available.
Actually, on Amazon, Derailing Democracy, they do have some for sale.
Really?
Yes, they do.
Well, never mind then. Last I heard it was out of print, but maybe they're, I don't know, I guess maybe they still... all right, never mind then.
Well,
carry on.
They got some anyway. Yeah, so... the 3 books and the website also. And is the Lincoln thing what you're primarily doing right now, or if not, what are you working on right now?
That has been that's been my primary area of new research. That's what I've been doing spending all of my research time on. And as far as writing, I just did a final chapter on Moon Doggie, which was posted a few weeks ago, and now I'm trying to finish up all of the loose ends, all of the leftover material I have on Laurel Canyon, and get that wrapped up, and then I will most likely venture into starting to write up all the Lincoln material, which is going to be another long multi-part series, most likely. So that's sort of my current orientation right now.
It sounds really good. I can't wait to see that. And the fact that the LC is going to continue as well. And you had noted that you still have a lot of material to put in there, and I think that's great, because it's something that we can always come back to. And because it's so voluminous, you can come back and read it again and again, because there's always going to be some little tidbit that you'll come up with on a second or third reading to ponder over that you maybe didn't notice the first time. And that's why I think that's another reason probably why it's so popular too, because there's just so much information there. When you come back and you look at it again, you say, hey, wait a minute, I don't remember reading that the first time, and then you look at it a little bit different and come up with some other conclusions, and that lead you into some other different directions too. So is there anything else?
Feedback is always appreciated, by the way. The Black Dahlia connection was actually came from a tip from a reader. I had missed that, and a reader pointed out to me that Michelle Phillips and Tamar Hodel connection, which I had not been aware of. So feedback is always appreciated. It's it's sort of a collaborative effort. That's one of the benefits of doing this kind of stuff as a web-based project rather than as a book. That if readers bring in new information, it can it can be added and updated. So it's always appreciated.
Okay. Well, you have a contact on your website that people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, I have an email.
I believe
link
so. Yeah.
there,
Yeah. There's an email link on the website that if people want to get in touch with you, they can do that. And are you currently doing any other? I mean, you had mentioned that you were doing some other interviews and stuff. Do you do anything regularly? Are there any shows that you're involved with, or anything else that you'd like to promote?
The Maria Heller show. I do a regular monthly thing with her. I have for quite a while now. I co-host a show one day a month with her called what does she call it? Send in the Clowns.
Sounds good.
That I've done with her for years. But other than that, no. Any of the other interviews I do are generally just sort of one-time things, and sometimes they'll have me come back for a second or third thing if there's additional material they want to go over. But the only like recurring spot I have is with Maria.
Okay, great. Is there anything else?
MariaHeller.net, I think, or something is her website, I believe.
I think there's a link to it on your homepage.
Yeah, actually, at the top of my page there's a link to it. Yeah. Right.
There's a link to it on your homepage. Is there anything else that you want to promote, or anything else that you'd like to talk about in the last couple minutes we have left?
That's probably about it. Yeah, no, I think nothing else that immediately comes to mind now.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. Once again, Dave McGowan, everybody. At davesweb.cnchost.com, author also of Program to Kill, Understanding the F Word, and Derailing Democracy. And I did just check with Amazon.com, so if you're looking for those books, they do have copies available of all of them. So you can pick them up if you so desire. But regardless of your point of view, when it comes to these particular topics, the Laurel Canyon scene and Apollo and the upcoming Lincoln assassination, I'm sure with Dave's writing and the connections that he makes there, even whether you believe we went to the moon or not, you'll enjoy the Apollo writings. And the Laurel Canyon thing is just an amazing collection of material that everybody should definitely check out. So, Dave, I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and I would definitely like to have you on again at some point in the future where we can go a little more in depth on some of these. And if you do start putting out Lincoln stuff, we could even get into that as well, because I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. No problem. I enjoyed it as well, and thank you for the opportunity and for all the high praise. And I look forward to talking to you again sometime.
That sounds great, and praise is well deserved, Dave. So thanks again, and have a great evening. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. So that was Dave McGowan. We have a couple minutes for me to wrap up the show. I'll just remind everybody again that I'm here every Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Blog Talk Radio for the Stench of Truth radio show. And I'm currently booked up through June and into the first week of July, and I have some good guests coming up. I'll be talking with Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. We'll be talking about the Nine in the Stargate conspiracy. That will be July 1st, I think, is when we're going to be doing that. But have a look at my page, and you will see upcoming guests that I have. Also, I want to remind everybody to to check out my videos on YouTube if you haven't done so. Tenebrous, T-N-E-B-R-O-U-S-T. My show there is also called The Stench of Truth. If you don't mind some profanity now and again, or a lot of profanity sometimes, please check out my show over there. And I do have 2 blogs, Tenebrous T, The Stench of Truth, and Tenebrous T, Populist Politics. You can check those out as well if you're so inclined. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and remind you to come back next week. And thanks to everybody in the chat room, and thanks again to Dave McGowan for sharing a lot of his material with us today on Apollo and inside the LC. And I'll remind you again one more time that Dave's website is davesweb.cnchost.com. And special thanks once again to Vocal Brush over at YouTube. If you like the introductory music to the show, please stop by and say hi to her and tell her thanks for the music. And I'll bid you all good evening, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Same time, same place for the Stench of Truth Radio. Bye-bye.